80 million people. That is the number the National Weather Service is carrying this week. 80 million Americans currently under extreme heat warnings or heat advisories from the southern plains through the desert southwest. And that number is not going down. The Weather Prediction Center issued its latest discussion just yesterday, calling this heat mass, and I want you to hear this exact language, a steamy air mass even by mid to late August standards. That sentence stopped me, because mid to late August is already supposed to be the hottest stretch of the year, and our own forecasters are saying this goes beyond even that. So what does it take for a late August heat event to shock professional meteorologists? I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like, city by city, day by day, all the way through the first week of September. But there is a number I keep coming back to, a number tied to 2011, and by the time we get through everything today, you will understand why that number changes what this summer means for every one of you. The southern plains right now are sitting under one of the most stubborn upper-level ridges I have tracked in years. Dallas reached 109 degrees on Tuesday. The heat index peaked at 111. An extreme heat warning was in effect across the entire Fort Worth and Dallas metro area through Tuesday evening, followed immediately by a heat advisory through Wednesday night, meaning there is essentially no break between active warnings. That is not a gap in the heat. That is the heat continuing under a different label. Lubbock, Midland, Amarillo, San Antonio, all of them are baking under the same anchored dome of high pressure that has not meaningfully shifted in over a week. Oklahoma City has been running triple digits for days. Tulsa is in the same situation. In Louisiana, the Gulf waters are feeding moisture into an already overheated atmosphere, and places like Shreveport and Baton Rouge are dealing with heat indices that push past 110 degrees, even when the air temperature alone reads 103. The body cannot cool itself in that environment. That is the threshold where heat stops being uncomfortable and starts being dangerous. Here is who needs to watch this the most over the next 48 hours. Anyone in central and southern Texas, especially those without reliable air conditioning, is in a serious situation. Overnight lows across the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex have been running in the low to mid-80s. That means your body gets no relief after sundown. From a physiological standpoint, the overnight temperature is often more dangerous than the daytime peak, because it robs the body of the one window it has to recover. The same pattern is grinding through central Oklahoma, where nighttime lows are staying near 80 degrees. New Mexico's southern counties are under the ridge too, with Alamogordo and Las Cruces running well above 100 degrees. And here is something I did not expect to see in late August. The Climate Prediction Center has issued a high risk of extreme heat extending all the way through September 2nd for the central and southern plains. That is not a short-duration event. That is a sustained, grinding heat siege with what the CPC describes as elevated chances of daytime temperatures and heat index values exceeding the 90th climatological percentile. Most locations inside the highlighted zone are expected to exceed 100 degrees. Heat index values may push past 110, where Gulf moisture is highest. Meanwhile, look at what is building for the southwest. The National Weather Service confirmed that the desert southwest is expecting daytime highs of 110 to 115 degrees through the end of this week. Arizona and New Mexico could break daily records, and this is not the first time this summer that the southwest has been in this territory. Phoenix hit 116.9 degrees on July 24th. El Centro, California matched it on July 25th. Tacna, Arizona and Laughlin, Nevada both touched 120 degrees in the first week of August. That temperature is almost incomprehensible for a human body in the open air. So when the Weather Prediction Center says this current dome is abnormal even by late August standards, I want you to understand that those words are coming from people who already lived through the hottest month in American history just 4 weeks ago. July 2026. NOAA confirmed it. The July 2026 average temperature for the contiguous United States came in at 76.89 degrees Fahrenheit. That broke the Dust Bowl record from July 1936. 130 years of records, and this summer snapped the one that had survived the Great Depression-era heat of the 1930s. That is the context in which this current late August dome is operating. The ground is already primed, the soil is already dry, and the atmosphere overhead is being fed by a Super El Nino that is not weakening, it is strengthening. Now I need to pause right here and tell you about something the models are showing for the first week of September, because the picture is not what most people are expecting. The Weather Prediction Center's extended forecast, issued Tuesday, maps out what happens from Friday, August 28th through Tuesday, September 2nd. Pay attention to this sequence. The dangerous heat that has been concentrated over the desert southwest and far south Texas is going to reposition. It is not leaving, it is moving. The upper-level ridge shifts and expands east and north, back over the central and southern plains, and deeper into the mid-south. Places that thought they might get a brief break this weekend are instead going to see the heat dome roll through them on the back end. The southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley are looking at another round of 100 to 110 degree temperatures through the first days of September, and the CPC's probabilistic hazard tools are showing that the high-risk designation, their highest category, remains valid through September 2nd, at which point their guidance shows a reduction to near zero probability of extreme heat. That is actually meaningful. That suggests a genuine pattern shift is coming in the second week of September. But we have to get through the next 10 days first. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where you are watching from and whether you are inside the heat zone I just described. Let me give you something specific about the scope of what 80 million people under heat warnings actually means on the ground. The NWS regional offices filing active heat alerts right now span from the NWS Lubbock office in the heart of West Texas all the way to the NWS Phoenix office in the Sonoran Desert and north through the NWS Billings office in eastern Montana. That is not a regional event. That is a continental footprint of hazardous heat. And within that footprint, the intensity varies in ways that matter depending on where you live. The driest heat, the kind that shows up without humidity, is in the desert southwest. Phoenix, Tucson, Yuma, Las Vegas. The body can theoretically sweat in dry heat, which gives some cooling effect even at extreme temperatures. The dangerous zone is where you combine high temperatures with elevated moisture, and that combination is showing up most acutely along the Interstate 10 corridor from San Antonio east through Houston, Beaumont, and into Baton Rouge. Houston right now is seeing temperatures near 102 to 104 degrees, with dew points in the mid to upper 70s. That combination puts the heat index above 112 degrees. At that level, the Centers for Disease Control categorizes the risk as danger, not caution, not extreme caution, danger. Heat cramps and heat exhaustion are likely. Heat stroke is possible with prolonged exposure or exertion. And this is what Houston residents have been waking up to for the better part of the past week. The situation in northern Florida is worth noting separately. Jacksonville, Tallahassee, and Gainesville are running temperatures in the upper 90s to low hundreds, with similar moisture loading from the Gulf Basin. Florida's East Coast cities are slightly moderated by Atlantic sea breeze, but even Daytona Beach and Jacksonville's inland communities are seeing heat indices in the 105 to 108 range through the afternoon hours. These are not trivial numbers for a population that includes a large percentage of elderly residents and outdoor workers. The 7-day roadmap breaks down like this. Today, Thursday, August 27th, the dome is centered over Texas, Oklahoma, and the desert southwest. Friday, August 28th, the ridge begins a slow eastward lean. The southern plains stay in triple digits. Saturday, August 29th, heat expands across the mid-south. The Mississippi Valley begins to feel the full pressure of the dome's eastern ridge. Arkansas, northern Louisiana, western Tennessee. All of these areas are about to feel temperatures in the upper 90s to low hundreds, with heat indices well past 100 degrees. Sunday, August 30th, a few frontal systems are attempting to push south through the northern tier, but the ridge is blocking most of that flow. The Great Lakes will stay relatively cooler. The Ohio Valley will be warm. The southeast will be muggy and hot, running 8 to 12 degrees above normal. Monday, August 31st and Tuesday, September 1st, the southern plains begin to feel the next surge. The ridge reinforces. Oklahoma, Kansas, and the Texas Panhandle area could see temperatures right back near 108 to 110 degrees as we cross into September. Wednesday, September 2nd, the CPC's models show a sharp drop in the probability of extreme heat signals. Something shifts. The pattern relaxes. But I think it is worth asking, what exactly is driving this persistence? Because it is not random. Here is the mechanism. A strong upper-level ridge of high pressure has been anchored across the southern tier of the country, reinforced by sea surface temperature anomalies that are running above normal across both the Gulf waters and the eastern Pacific. The Gulf waters right now are warm enough to act as an energy and moisture source for the heat dome rather than a moderating force. When Gulf moisture feeds into a high-pressure ridge, the air mass becomes humid and hot simultaneously, which is what drives the heat index values you see across Louisiana and Mississippi. Meanwhile, the jet stream is displaced far to the north. The atmospheric blocking that is keeping frontal systems from punching south is being maintained by a pattern that ECMWF analysts are directly linking to the developing Super El Nino event in the tropical Pacific. And this is the part that changes everything. Before I get into the model data, I want to say something about the scale of what we are watching from a human exposure standpoint. The last time 80 million Americans were simultaneously under active heat alerts for a sustained period was during the extreme summers of 2011 and 2012. In 2011, the heat was responsible for over 600 deaths nationally, and that number, experts have long argued, was an undercount, because heat deaths are systematically undercounted in coroner reports, where underlying conditions are listed as primary cause of death. The real toll of heat events in the United States has been estimated to be 2 to 5 times the official count, because heat exacerbates heart failure, kidney disease, and respiratory conditions in ways that rarely show up on a death certificate as heat. The summer of 2026 has already attributed more than 70 deaths directly to heat through early August, per the tracking done on the North American heatwave. That number is going to be revised upward significantly once the full summer's mortality data is reviewed. I raise this not to alarm, but to contextualize the weight of what an 80 million person heat warning footprint actually represents in terms of human vulnerability. The numbers are not just meteorological, they are medical. The ECMWF extended forecast, which I look at alongside the GFS for any multi-week pattern signal, is now showing Nino 3.4 region sea surface temperature anomalies approaching plus 2.2 degrees Celsius by September. That would push this El Nino event firmly into Super El Nino territory. The World Meteorological Organization's July update confirmed that multi-model ensembles from every major forecasting centre, NOAA's CFS-V2, ECMWF, the Canadian model, all show consistent and significant warming of ocean temperatures across the central and eastern equatorial Pacific, with seasonal average anomalies expected to exceed 2 degrees Celsius. The forecast models show remarkable agreement. WMO's exact language was remarkable agreement, and in meteorology, that level of confidence across independent modelling systems is not something you see casually. What does that mean for this heat pattern? El Niño's peak effect on United States temperatures typically lags the tropical Pacific warming by 3 to 6 months. We are in that window right now. The ocean warming that accelerated through the spring and early summer is now driving the atmospheric response. The upper-level ridge that is pinning the heat dome over the southern plains, that ridge has an El Niño fingerprint on it. And the most concerning thing the ECMWF analysis is showing is that this is not just any El Niño. This is an Eastern Pacific El Niño event, which generates a stronger North Pacific pressure response than a Central Pacific event would. That matters because it affects where the ridging locks down over North America and how persistent it becomes. Let me tell you about something the models updated on overnight that I have not seen covered anywhere this morning. The ECMWF's latest extended ensemble run is now showing westerly wind anomalies continuing across the western and central Pacific through late September. That is a direct mechanical input into further El Niño growth. Westerly wind bursts push warm water east across the Pacific through what oceanographers call Kelvin waves. Those Kelvin waves travel underwater, arrive at the eastern Pacific coast of South America weeks later, and surface as additional warming in the Nino 3.4 region. This is not a speculative chain of events. This is the process that was verified in the 1997 through 98 Super El Nino and Severe Weather Europe's most recent analysis of the current atmospheric data shows it happening again, right now. The ECMWF ensemble maintains this forcing signal through the end of September. What this means practically is that every forecast I produce from this point forward is going to be coloured by the reality that the forcing mechanism is still growing. We are not at peak El Nino yet. The peak arrives between November and January, and the atmospheric standing wave, the locked configuration that keeps the Walker circulation fixed over the tropical Pacific, is forming right now. I want to come back to a number I mentioned at the very start of this video. This is one of the strongest sustained heat patterns I have seen across the American South in at least 15 years. The record that has defined summer extremes since 2011, the hottest summer for the contiguous United States since the Dust Bowl, that record now has company. NOAA confirmed that July 2026 alone already broke the all-time monthly temperature record going back to 1895. Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico and Louisiana all reported their hottest summer on record in 2011. That benchmark stood for 15 years. Now we are in late August of 2026 and the heat is not backing off. The question is whether the full meteorological summer of 2026, June, July and August combined, will match or exceed what 2011 did from a seasonal standpoint. I think it already has, and the data supports that conclusion. Here is what the numbers tell us. American weather stations set 6,452 daily heat records against only 1,550 cold records between late May and August 21st of this year. That is a heat-to-cold ratio of better than 4 to 1. Margins like this do not happen in a random atmospheric year. This is a system-level signal. Miles City, Montana hit 114.9 degrees on July 12th, beating its previous daily record by a full 12 degrees. Not a fraction of a degree, 12 degrees. Mildred, Montana exceeded its old mark by 13 degrees. Farson, Wyoming broke its record by 13.1 degrees. When you see margins that large, you know a heat dome parked over a region that has no atmospheric history of tolerating that kind of air. Now let me bring you in to the channel that is tracking all of this. I am Arthur, and this is US Weather Threat. And I want to make sure, before we go any further, that you understand the full weight of what I just walked you through. 6,452 daily heat records against 1,550 cold records in a span of roughly 90 days, late May through August 21st. Think about what a daily record means. It means that on a given date at a given location, the temperature was higher on that date in 2026 than it had ever been on that same date in that location's entire recorded history. It does not matter if the record goes back 50 years or 120 years. The temperature on that specific calendar day beat everything that came before it, and we accumulated 6,000 of those, 4 for every single cold record that fell. This is not a collection of statistical outliers clustered around 1 or 2 exceptional heat domes. This is a distributed pattern across the entire country, from Montana's high plains to the Texas Panhandle to the Great Lakes region, that accumulated over 90 days. It is the consistency of this heat signature, not just the peaks, that tells the full story of summer 2026. If you've been watching for a while, you know I do not escalate for entertainment. I follow data, model data, observational data, NOAA confirmations. When I tell you a pattern is significant, it is because I have cross-referenced it across multiple independent sources. If you are not subscribed yet, do that right now, because the El Nino trajectory and everything that follows from it through the fall is something you will want to follow in real time. One click, free, and you will not miss the updates that matter. Let me tell you what I think gets overlooked in the coverage of this heat event, and this is the part that has been building in the back of my mind all week. The overnight temperature story. Everyone focuses on the daytime high, 109 in Dallas, 115 in the desert. Those numbers are real and they are dangerous. But the overnight lows in this event are where the cumulative danger lives. Dallas has been seeing overnight lows near 82 degrees, Fort Worth near 84. Across large portions of central Texas and Oklahoma, the body has had essentially zero recovery window for over a week. The human body is designed to use the cooler overnight hours to restore core temperature. When overnight lows stay in the low 80s, that process fails. This is why heat-related illness in prolonged dome events tends to cluster in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th days of an event rather than the 1st. It is the accumulation of thermal stress without recovery that drives hospitalizations. The NWS Weather Prediction Center noted specifically that the nights will not cool down and that these prolonged high temperatures, coupled with little overnight relief, increase the risk of heat-related illness across the southern plains through the week. I track the Gulf waters on this, and what I see concerns me. The Gulf sea surface temperatures are running above the climatological baseline across much of the western basin. This is relevant not just for potential tropical activity later in the season, it is relevant right now because warm Gulf waters are the moisture engine feeding this heat dome's humidity component. A drier air mass is oppressive, a humid air mass is lethal at these temperature thresholds, and the Gulf waters are running warm enough to sustain this moisture flux through at least the end of August. That heat index of 110 to 115 degrees for southern Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, and northern Florida, that is being maintained in part by the persistent moisture feed from the Gulf Basin. Have you ever seen your city hit heat index values above 110 degrees multiple days in a row? If you have this summer, drop a comment below. I want to know where you are and what conditions have been like on the ground. Now let me take you to the big picture. Because the Super El Nino signal is not just a heat amplifier for this summer, it is reshaping what the next 12 months look like for the United States and for the global atmospheric pattern in ways that are worth understanding deeply. The ECMWF's extended ensemble forecast is showing Nino 3.4 anomalies potentially reaching +3 degrees Celsius or higher by the winter peak, which would put the 2026 through 2027 El Nino event in the same territory as the legendary events of 1997 through 98. Severe Weather Europe's analysis of the latest ECMWF data notes that most ensemble members are exceeding the +2 degrees super event threshold, and many are aiming for the +3 range, which they describe as approaching a historical event, if verified. The westerly wind bursts across the western and central Pacific are sustaining and amplifying the ocean warming. That is the mechanical driver of this El Niño's strength, and it has not weakened. What does a Super El Nino actually do to the fall and winter pattern across the United States? The fall 2026 forecast from Severe Weather Europe, using ECMWF and NMME data, is showing an unusual setup. A strong high-pressure anomaly over Canada, lower pressure over the North Pacific, and a more active southern storm track across the United States. This is a pattern that typically shows up in the cold season, but the Super El Nino forcing is strong enough to begin establishing these features early. The NOAA CPC's August outlook confirmed above normal temperature probability exceeding 50% for the southeast and southern mid-Atlantic through August, driven by dry soil and warm coastal waters. The southern plains also leaned warm, with roughly a 40% probability of above normal temperatures. This outlook is being verified in real time right now. There is a concept I need to walk you through here, and it is one that I think is underexplained in weather coverage generally. It is the difference between a Central Pacific El Nino and an Eastern Pacific El Nino. Most years when we talk about El Nino, the warming center is in the Central Pacific, somewhere around the international date line. When it is centered there, the atmospheric response tends to be diffuse. The ridging and troughing that results across North America is moderate. But when the warming center sits in the Eastern Pacific, closer to the coast of South America, the atmospheric teleconnection is sharper. The North Pacific response is stronger. The ridging that sets up over the southern United States is more intense, and that is exactly what the current event is. NOAA's own analysis described this as an Eastern Pacific event, and Severe Weather Europe confirmed it in their latest model review. A 2004 study on El Niño types showed that Eastern Pacific events produce a stronger North Pacific pressure response than Central Pacific events. We are living inside that response right now. Here is what I think most casual coverage is missing. The warming of the baseline atmosphere and this El Niño event are not simply additive in a linear way. They interact and amplify each other. A scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory explained to NPR that for garden variety heat waves across the United States, climate change alone has increased the temperature of those events by 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. If you take that baseline warming and layer a developing Super El Nino on top of it, you get an atmospheric environment where the upper-level ridge can park over a region with greater intensity and for a longer duration than it would have even 2 or 3 decades ago. The heat dome is not new. What happens inside a heat dome in this combined atmospheric context, that is what has changed. The baseline is higher, El Nino pushes it further. And the soil moisture deficit, the fact that drought conditions are already flagged across the central and southern plains, removes the natural evaporative cooling that would otherwise moderate ground-level temperatures. Let me update you now on what the GFS and ECMWF are both showing for the pattern shift that the CPC is hinting at around September 3rd through 5th. Both models have been in reasonable agreement that the upper-level ridge will begin to erode after September 2nd. The ECMWF ensemble shows the ridge weakening as a trough approaches from the Pacific Northwest, which would allow frontal systems from Canada to push further south into the Central Plains for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. The GFS has been slightly more aggressive in dropping that trough into the region by September 4th. What I am watching is how far south that front can push, because if it only makes it to the northern plains, the southern plains and mid-south will feel only partial relief. The CPC's Week 2 outlook through September 8th through 14th is showing a shift toward near normal or slightly above normal temperatures for the central tier, with the warmest anomalies drifting back toward the southwest. That is meaningful. It suggests the southern plains will finally breathe after a stretch that, if we count back to when this dome established itself, will have lasted nearly 2 weeks without a break. But here is where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that most people who turned this video off early are going to miss. The Super El Nino's atmospheric standing wave is not a summer phenomenon. The ECMWF extended forecast, which Severe Weather Europe analysed in detail this week, shows the Walker circulation, the equatorial belt of rising air over the Pacific and sinking air over the Indian Ocean, locking into a fixed configuration through the fall. This is what scientists call an atmospheric standing wave. It does not move easily. It reshapes the entire northern hemisphere pattern downstream, and for the United States, the downstream consequence during strong El Nino events is a very active southern storm track, meaning the same atmospheric forcing that is cooking the south right now will eventually transition into a very wet and stormy pattern for the southern tier as we move deeper into fall and early winter. More moisture, more instability, a jet stream that loads up across the southwest and drives storm systems east across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. That is the El Nino winter playbook. And it begins to establish itself earlier in the pattern when the event is as strong as this one. Something updated in the overnight model runs that I want to flag before I move on. The GFS ensemble mean, as of this morning's run, is now showing a stronger ridge reinforcement over the southern plains around September 1st through 3rd than the previous run was showing. This is a small but meaningful shift. It suggests the eastern ridge extension of the heat dome, the part that will push into Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi over the coming weekend, may be slightly more intense than what I was tracking yesterday. I am going to be watching the 6Z run closely this morning to see if this holds, because if it does, the Mid-South communities I described for Sunday through Monday need to bump their expectations up by 2 to 3 degrees on their highs. Memphis, Nashville, Birmingham, and Jackson, Mississippi. Pay attention to your local NWS offices this week. I want to be specific about what a plus 2.2 to plus 3 degree Nino 3.4 anomaly means in practical terms for the southeast and south-central United States as we go from September through November. Severe weather. Europe's fall 2026 forecast analysis, using both ECMWF and NMME data through the November-December window, is showing the warm anomalies shifting west and southwest across the continent. The Great Plains and Midwest are expected to trend toward a cooler relative pattern as the ridge repositions. The southeast and south, however, remain warm, because the El Nino-driven subtropical jet maintains moisture advection from the tropics. That subtropical moisture stream and the warmer-than-normal Gulf waters combine to keep the southern states in an active weather pattern through fall. Wetter than normal for Florida, Georgia, and the Gulf Coast states, potentially stormier along the Mississippi Valley. And for winter, A very different picture from what the Midwest and Northern Tier will see, because the El Nino split flow pattern divides the country. There is a drought dimension to this story that I have not addressed yet, and it ties directly into why this heat is hitting so hard. The NOAA CPC's probabilistic hazards outlook flagged rapid onset drought risk for the central and southern plains and the middle and lower Mississippi Valley. Rapid onset drought, sometimes called flash drought, is exactly what it sounds like. It develops fast. It develops under conditions of intense heat, low humidity, and strong winds. And it creates a feedback loop that makes subsequent heat events worse. Here is why. When the soil is dry, there is no evaporative cooling at the ground surface. In a well-watered landscape, some of the solar energy hitting the ground goes into evaporating soil moisture, which has a cooling effect on the near-surface air. In a drought-stricken landscape, all of that solar energy goes directly into heating the air. The boundary layer temperatures over dry soil can run 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than over moist soil under identical atmospheric conditions. The southern plains are already in drought. Some areas of western Texas and parts of Oklahoma are in moderate to severe drought conditions, and the heat dome has been actively deepening that drought every single day by pulling moisture out of the ground through evaporation, while delivering no precipitation in return. By the time this dome breaks, the drought footprint will be larger than when it started, and the next heat event, whenever it comes, will find drier ground and amplify more efficiently. In 2011, Texas experienced a single-year drought so severe that over $5 billion in agricultural losses were recorded from that state alone. The heat and drought together killed cattle, destroyed crops, and cracked the earth across the southern plains in ways that some areas took years to recover from. I am not saying 2026 is a repeat of 2011. I am saying the atmospheric ingredients, the El Nino signal layered over a warming baseline, the persistent upper-level ridge, the Gulf moisture feed combined with dry soil, are producing a pattern that rhymes with 2011 in ways that anyone who tracks long-range climate data should be watching carefully. The numbers from this summer are not going to be easily forgotten by anyone who works in climatology. 6,452 daily heat records against 1,550 cold records from late May through August 21st alone. The summer is not over. That ratio is still building. And against that backdrop, what the NOAA CPC probabilistic hazards outlook is showing through September 2nd is essentially a continuation of the same system. The synopsis is unambiguous: a persistent area of strong, mid-level high pressure over the southern tier, rapid onset drought risk flagged for the central and southern plains and the middle and lower Mississippi Valley, daytime temperatures likely to exceed 100 degrees across most of the highlighted high-risk area, heat index values possibly exceeding 110 where dew points are higher. This is not a forecast for a single spike. This is the baseline they expect to maintain for another 10 days. I want to leave you with this thought, and then I want to hear from you. The record that the title of this video references, the hottest summer in United States history since the Dust Bowl, set in 2011, that record existed for 15 years. Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana all logged their hottest summer on record in that year. It was the kind of year that stays in regional memory for a generation. The summer of 2026 has already broken the all-time monthly temperature record for the contiguous United States, with July alone. August is running dangerous and hot. The final verdict on whether 2026 surpasses 2011 as the hottest meteorological summer in modern American records will come when NOAA publishes its full June, July, August analysis in September. I will be watching that number the moment it drops. And whatever it says, I will bring it to you here, with the context, the mechanism, and the full picture of what it means. If you are watching from Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, or anywhere across the South right now, tell me in the comments what temperatures you have been seeing. Have your overnight lows been staying in the 80s? Have you had days where the heat index pushed past 110? I want to know who is living through this on the ground, because that is what this channel is built around. Real data, real impacts, real people in real places. Like this video if you found it useful. Share it with anyone in the Southern Plains, the Mid-South, or the Southwest. Someone you know who needs to understand what is actually happening and why the heat keeps rebuilding instead of breaking. Tomorrow, I will be watching the progression of that frontal boundary out of the Canadian prairies, and whether it has enough energy to push meaningfully into the plains by this weekend. If the GFS and ECMWF converge on that solution, the southern plains could see their first meaningful temperature relief since mid-August by the second week of September. That would be welcome. But the Super El Nino means this is not the last conversation we have about heat this year. Stay right here on US Weather Threat, because what this Super El Nino does to the fall storm pattern, the drought footprint, and the winter temperature outlook is going to be one of the most consequential weather stories of the year. The data is pointing in a clear direction. I will make sure you see all of it. I will see you tomorrow.